Jiwon had always believed that marriage was a transaction, not a promise. At 29, he stood in the lobby of the Grand Shilla Hotel with his shoulders straight and his smile practiced, waiting for the woman who would save his dying architecture firm. His father's company had collapsed 6 months ago, taking with it every dream Jiwon had built since graduation. The debt collectors called daily. His mother hadn't slept properly in weeks. Then came the offer from the Choi family. Marry their daughter Sora, receive a $10 million investment, and ask no questions. He signed the papers the same afternoon. Sora arrived 15 minutes late to their first meeting, wearing a cream blazer and flat shoes, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She didn't apologize. She sat across from him in the hotel cafe, ordered black coffee, and said, "I assume you know why we're doing this?" Her voice was steady, almost clinical. Jiwon nodded. She continued, "My family needs someone presentable, someone who won't embarrass them at charity dinners. You need money. It's simple." She slid a folder across the table. "These are the terms. Separate bedrooms, no personal questions, public appearances only when necessary. We live together for 2 years, then divorce quietly." Jiwon scanned the contract, his jaw tight. He wanted to feel insulted, but desperation had already stripped away his pride. "Fine," he said. They shook hands like business partners closing a deal. The wedding was small, attended mostly by Sora's relatives who looked at Jiwon like he was furniture being appraised. His own family stayed home, too ashamed to celebrate what felt like surrender. Sora wore white, but her face remained expressionless throughout the ceremony. When the officiant asked if she took him as her husband, she said, "I do," with the same tone someone might use to order lunch. Jiwon felt something hollow open inside his chest, but he smiled for the photographer. They left separately after the reception. That night, in the expensive apartment her family had purchased for them, Jiwon lay in his designated bedroom and stared at the ceiling. Through the wall, he heard nothing. No movement. No sound. It was as if she didn't exist at all. The first month passed in carefully choreographed silence. They moved around each other like ghosts, leaving notes about groceries and schedules on the kitchen counter. Sora left for work before dawn and returned after dark. Jiwon rarely saw her except on Sunday mornings, when she sat on the balcony with her coffee and a book, her face tilted toward the sun. He wondered what she was reading but never asked. The contract had been clear. No personal questions. Still, he noticed things. How she always bought 2 cartons of milk even though she didn't drink it. How she folded his laundry when it came out of the dryer even though she wasn't obligated to. How sometimes late at night he heard her pacing in her room, back and forth, like someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. 3 months into the marriage, Jiwon's firm landed its first major project, redesigning a community center in a low-income neighborhood. He threw himself into the work, grateful for something that felt meaningful again. One evening, he spread blueprints across the dining table, too absorbed to notice Sora had come home early. "What's this?" she asked, standing in the doorway. He looked up, startled. She'd changed out of her work clothes into an oversized sweater, her hair down for the first time since the wedding. She looked younger, softer. "A project," he said. "A center for kids who need after-school programs. Art classes, tutoring, that kind of thing." She moved closer, studying the drawings. "This wall," she said, pointing. "If you angle it here instead, you'll get better natural light in the afternoon. That's when kids do homework." Jiwon blinked. "How do you know that?" Sora's expression flickered, something crossing her face too quickly to name. "I just do," she said, and walked away before he could respond. But the moment had cracked something open. Over the following weeks, Sora began lingering in shared spaces. She'd sit on the couch with her laptop while he worked at the table, and occasionally she'd offer small observations about his designs. Her suggestions were always practical, thoughtful, and surprisingly insightful. Jiwon found himself seeking her opinion more often. "What do you think about adding a garden here?" he'd ask, and she'd tilt her head, considering. "Kids need spaces that feel like escape," she'd say quietly. "Not everything has to be structured." He didn't understand how she knew these things, but he stopped questioning it. Instead, he started watching her more carefully. One Saturday, Jiwon went to the project site to meet with contractors. As he approached, he saw a woman kneeling beside a group of children on the sidewalk, helping them chalk drawings on the pavement. His breath caught. It was Sora. She wore jeans and a faded jacket, her hair in a messy bun, and she was laughing. Actually laughing. A little girl held up a picture of a rainbow, and Sora clapped her hands together, her entire face illuminated with genuine joy. Jiwon stood frozen, unable to reconcile this woman with the one who shared his apartment like a stranger. When Sora finally noticed him, the light in her eyes dimmed. She stood quickly, brushing chalk dust from her knees. "What are you doing here?" he asked. She hesitated. "Volunteering," she said simply. "I come every Saturday." Before he could ask more, she gathered her things and left. That night, Jiwon couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Sora's face with those children, the way she'd looked so completely present, so alive. It contrasted sharply with the careful blankness she wore at home. He got up and found her sitting on the balcony again, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights. "Can I join you?" he asked. She didn't look at him but nodded. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Jiwon said, "You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but why do you volunteer there?" Sora's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "Because I know what it's like," she said, her voice barely audible. "To be invisible, to feel like nobody cares if you exist or not." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Jiwon didn't fully understand. "I don't understand," he admitted. Sora took a shaky breath. "My family. They didn't always have money. When I was 8, my father's business failed. We lost everything. We lived in a shelter for 2 years. Her voice cracked slightly. "I remember being so hungry I'd steal crackers from the donation box. I remember teachers pretending not to notice I wore the same clothes every day. I remember feeling like I was too damaged for anyone to love." Jiwon's chest constricted. "Sora." She turned to him then, her eyes wet. "Then my father got lucky. He made money. A lot of it. And suddenly everyone acted like those years never happened. My family pretends I was never that scared little girl. They wanted me to marry someone who'd never look too closely, someone who'd keep up appearances." A tear slid down her cheek. "But those kids at the center, they see me, the real me, and I see them." Jiwon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. She didn't resist. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry you had to go through that alone." Sora laughed bitterly. "Don't apologize. You married me for money. I don't expect anything else." But Jiwon shook his head. "Maybe that's how it started," he said. "But you're not what I expected. You're not this cold, detached person. You're someone who shows up for kids who have nothing. Someone who knows exactly how to make a space feel safe. Someone who—" He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "Someone I want to know better." Sora looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Jiwon said, "I think we're both tired of being invisible." Something shifted that night. They began talking, really talking. Sora told him about the years in the shelter, about the teacher who'd saved her life by believing in her, about how she'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through college while her father rebuilt his fortune. She told him about the shame that still lived in her bones, how she felt like an imposter in expensive clothes. Jiwon told her about his own failures, about watching his father's company crumble, about the shame of needing rescue. They discovered they both understood what it meant to be broken and then forced to act whole. "I thought you were just another rich girl," Jiwon admitted one evening. Sora smiled sadly. "I thought you were just another desperate man. I guess we were both wrong." As summer turned to fall, they fell into new rhythms. Saturday mornings became sacred. Jiwon started joining Sora at the community center, helping with art classes and learning the kids' names. He watched her come alive in those spaces, saw how patient she was with a shy boy who wouldn't speak, how she celebrated a girl's crooked painting like it was museum-worthy, and the kids adored her. They climbed into her lap, fought for her attention, trusted her with their secrets. Jiwon found himself falling in love not with the woman his contract described, but with this person who gave pieces of herself freely to children who needed to know they mattered. One afternoon, a little boy named Minho asked Jiwon, "Is Ms. Sora your girlfriend?" Jiwon glanced at Sora, who was helping another child across the room. "She's my wife," he said. Minho's eyes widened. "That means you love her, right?" The question lodged itself in Jiwon's throat. Did he? When had the hollow feeling in his chest filled with something warm? When had her laughter become the best part of his day? When had the thought of losing her, of the contract ending, started to feel unbearable? "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." But loving her meant confronting an impossible truth. Their marriage had an expiration date. The contract stipulated 2 years, and they were approaching the halfway mark. Jiwon began waking up in cold sweats, imagining the day Sora would pack her things and leave. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but fear paralyzed him. What if she didn't feel the same? What if she still saw their arrangement as purely transactional? He couldn't bear another rejection, another failure. So he said nothing and watched the days slip past like water through his fingers. Sora, meanwhile, was fighting her own battle. She'd started noticing how Jiwon smiled at her when he thought she wasn't looking. How he'd started keeping her favorite tea stocked in the pantry. How he'd fixed the squeaky hinge on her bedroom door without being asked. Small gestures that felt enormous. She'd catch herself imagining a life beyond the contract, waking up to him every morning, building something real. But then she'd remember. He'd married her for money. Whatever kindness he showed now, it was probably just gratitude, not love. She couldn't let herself hope for more. Hope had always led to disappointment. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. Jiwon received a call from the hospital. His mother had collapsed. He rushed to her side, spending 3 terrifying hours in the waiting room before doctors assured him she was stable, just exhausted and stressed. When he finally came home near midnight, soaked and shaking, Sora was waiting in the living room. "Your mother?" she asked immediately. "She's okay," Jiwon said, his voice hoarse. "Just needs rest." Sora stood and, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. Jiwon broke. He buried his face in her shoulder and cried, all the fear and pressure of the past year pouring out. Sora held him tightly, stroking his hair, murmuring soft reassurances. "I've got you," she said. "You're not alone." When his tears finally subsided, Jiwon pulled back just enough to look at her. Her eyes were full of concern, her hands still cupping his face. "Sora," he whispered, "I can't do this anymore." Her face fell. "What do you mean?" "I can't pretend," he said desperately. "I can't pretend this is just a contract. I can't pretend I don't." He swallowed hard. "I'm in love with you. I don't know when it happened, but I am. And I know that wasn't the deal. And I know I have no right to ask for more. But I can't keep living like we have an expiration date. It's killing me." Sora stared at him, her mouth slightly open. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing. Then fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You idiot," she whispered. "I've been in love with you for months. I thought I was the only one. I thought you'd count down the days until you could leave." Jiwon let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Leave? Sora, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You see me, the real me, not the man I was supposed to be, but who I actually am. How could I ever want to leave that?" Sora kissed him then, her hands tangled in his wet hair, and Jiwon felt the last walls between them crumble. They kissed like people who'd been drowning and finally found air, like all the months of careful distance had been building to exactly this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sora pressed her forehead to his. "So, what do we do about the contract?" she asked. Jiwon smiled. "We tear it up. We start over. No terms, no conditions, just us, figuring it out together." Sora laughed, the sound bright and free. I'd like that. They rebuilt their marriage on entirely new foundations. The separate bedrooms became a joke. They woke up tangled together most mornings, trading sleepy kisses and stealing each other's coffee. Jiwon started joining Sora on her volunteer days permanently, and together they began planning an expansion for the community center. His architecture firm thrived, but he made sure to prioritize projects that mattered, that served people who'd been overlooked. Sora finally told her family the truth about her past, about the shelter years, and when they tried to shame her into silence, she walked away. "I'm done hiding who I am," she told Jiwon. "I'm done pretending those years didn't make me who I am." He kissed her temple. "Good, because I love exactly who you are." On their first anniversary, the real one, counting from that rainy November night, Jiwon took Sora back to the community center. The kids had planned a surprise party, decorating the walls with handmade cards and paintings. Minho, now a head taller, presented them with a drawing of two people holding hands under a rainbow. "This is you guys," he announced proudly, "because Ms. Sora says you found each other when everything was dark." Jiwon looked at his wife, her eyes shining with happy tears, and knew the boy was right. They'd both been lost in their own ways, both convinced they were too broken for real love. But somehow, in the space between a contract and a choice, they'd found each other. That night, lying in bed with Sora curled against his chest, Jiwon whispered, "Thank you." Sora tilted her head up. "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me see you," he said. "For trusting me with your story. For showing me that love isn't a transaction. It's a choice we make every day." Sora smiled, tracing patterns on his arm. "I should thank you too. You saw me when I was trying so hard to stay invisible. You made me believe I was worth more than my family's money or my past shame." She paused. "You made me believe I was worth loving." "You are," Jiwon said fiercely. "You're worth everything." They kissed slowly, tenderly, in the darkness of their shared bedroom. Outside, the city continued its restless movement, full of people searching for connection, for meaning, for someone who would see them truly. But here, in this small apartment that had once felt like a prison, two people had found exactly what they needed. Not a perfect love, but a real one. Not a transaction, but a promise. And that, they both knew, was worth infinitely more than any contract could ever contain. Years later, when people asked how they'd met, Jiwon and Sora would exchange knowing glances. "It's complicated," Sora would say with a smile. "Let's just say we had a very unconventional beginning," Jiwon would add, taking her hand. But between them, they carried the truth. That sometimes love doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it grows slowly in the quiet spaces between two people who were brave enough to stop hiding. Sometimes it blooms in the moment you realize that being seen, truly seen, is the greatest gift you can receive. And sometimes the person you married for all the wrong reasons turns out to be exactly the person you needed all along. The contract they'd signed sat forgotten in a drawer somewhere, gathering dust. They didn't need it anymore. They'd written a new story together, one without clauses or conditions, one that began with "I choose you" and had no end in sight. And every day, in 100 small ways, they continued to choose each other. That was the real promise. That was the real marriage. And that, they both agreed, was the only contract that ever mattered.